King Charles had instructed Queen Camilla to leave Clarence House and officially transferred control of the historic royal residence to Prince William. When the king placed his signature beneath the order, he did much more than simply hand over a property. He destroyed an arrangement Camilla believed would secure her position for the rest of her life. Before we go deeper into what this truly means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles sat alone with the residence order in front of him, reading the final paragraph for the second time. A residence order was an official command determining who could occupy and control a royal home, and this particular order carried consequences far beyond walls, rooms, and property. Clarence House represented closeness to the crown, official royal standing, and the private life Charles had built with Camilla through years of intense public pressure. His pen hovered above the document. Then he signed it. The silence afterward seemed heavier than the act itself. The king placed the pen down, but his hand remained over the page, almost as though he could already feel the distance beginning to open inside his marriage. One strict clause made the decision final. The queen consort could not regain control of the property through a household request, private arrangement, or appeal through royal staff. Someone had made certain there would be no reversal. Camilla received the news inside a private sitting room and initially said nothing. Her expression hardened when the message was repeated, and she immediately asked whether the arrangement was temporary. The answer gave her no comfort. It was permanent. And it had already been authorized. She stood and demanded to know why she had been excluded from the decision, but suddenly stopped when she realized that everything had already been completed before she had been given any opportunity to resist. William felt no sense of triumph when the order reached him. The prince had expected greater responsibilities to come gradually through careful preparation and formal public ceremonies. Instead, control of Clarence House was being handed directly to him through a decree that weakened his stepmother's position and placed him directly inside a confrontation between his father and the woman beside the throne. He understood the importance of the honor, but he also understood the emotional damage it could cause everyone involved. Behind the signed documents remained one sealed file known only to a small circle. The monarch had offered no complete explanation, and the future king began to suspect that Clarence House itself was only the visible consequence of something far more serious. Something had happened before the order was prepared. Something serious enough to make Charles choose immediate royal control over peace within his own marriage. As Camilla demanded answers and William struggled to understand exactly what he had inherited, attention shifted away from the signed decree and toward the three people whose private loyalties had suddenly collided. Behind all the formal palace language stood three people trapped inside an intensely personal rupture. Charles had acted as king, but Camilla experienced the decision as a wife being forced away from the home that had represented her acceptance. William had received a royal residence, yet the transfer carried none of the happiness normally associated with an inheritance. Each of them understood that Clarence House had suddenly become the ground where marriage, loyalty, and succession would be tested. Camilla moved slowly through rooms that had once represented security. For years, Clarence House had been much more than simply a residence. It had represented stability during the long years before Charles became king and proof that their marriage had eventually been accepted. Now royal staff were quietly preparing an inventory, an official record separating Camilla's personal belongings from property controlled by the crown. That small procedural detail made the removal feel painfully real. She stopped beside a table filled with family photographs and picked up one framed picture with both hands. The queen consort stared at it silently, remembering the years when every room around her seemed to confirm that she truly belonged beside Charles. Then the anger returned. Charles had done more than simply transfer a building. He had transformed their shared home into undeniable proof that the crown would always stand above their marriage. William felt the same decision closing around him from another direction. The prince understood the constitutional importance of receiving Clarence House because constitutional authority represented the duties and powers connected to the future leadership of the monarchy. Being placed there would bring him closer to the center of royal authority while his father still remained on the throne. But it also made William appear to be benefiting directly from Camilla's humiliation. He met Charles privately and carefully chose his words. William told his father that he did not want Clarence House if the transfer was intended as punishment. The king looked at his son for several moments before finally answering that the decision was about continuity, not revenge. When William asked for more explanation, Charles refused to provide one. That refusal only increased the tension. The future king feared becoming the visible winner in a conflict he had never asked to enter. Accepting Clarence House could destroy whatever possibility remained of peace with Camilla. Yet refusing it might weaken the clear line of succession his father appeared determined to protect. Charles eventually gave him only one explanation. The property, he said, had to be placed beyond private influence. Those words carried enormous weight because they suggested that someone had attempted to control Clarence House for reasons extending far beyond personal comfort or security. Camilla already understood exactly what he meant. Her thoughts returned to a recent gathering inside Clarence House when a conversation about William's future authority had unexpectedly become hostile. One sentence had changed the atmosphere. One document had been mentioned. And one person had walked away knowing that the conflict could no longer remain hidden. To the outside world, the transfer appeared sudden. But inside Clarence House, everyone involved knew that the fracture had actually begun during one particular night that none of them had been willing to discuss. Weeks before the decree was signed, a private dinner at Clarence House had ended with a statement Charles could not push from his mind. The gathering had originally been arranged to resolve ordinary questions surrounding William's expanding royal responsibilities. Instead, it exposed a much deeper struggle over who would influence the monarchy's next chapter. By the time the final guest departed, one chair had been pushed away from the table, one serious warning had been delivered, and the king's trust had suffered damage that could not easily be repaired. Charles had expected a controlled family conversation. Only Camilla and William were seated with him, without a large ceremonial gathering or a group of advisors influencing every response. The discussion was supposed to focus on future residences, household resources, and the prince's increasing responsibilities. Those issues carried enormous importance because Clarence House could eventually serve as an operational base for the next reign. But the Queen Consort believed the residence should remain under her authority for the rest of her life. Camilla waited until the dinner was nearly finished before placing a draft household arrangement on the table. A household arrangement was a written plan determining who controlled staff, rooms, documents, and access within a royal residence. The document stated that Clarence House would remain under Camilla's personal authority even if Charles eventually became unable to manage his own affairs. The wording did not appear temporary. It appeared permanent. William carefully read every page without interrupting. When he finished, the prince placed the document flat on the table and asked why his future office had been excluded from a decision involving a crown-controlled residence. That term referred to a property maintained for royal responsibilities rather than one held simply as private ownership. His voice remained calm, but the meaning behind his question was unmistakable. Personal protection, William argued, could not be allowed to override the responsibilities belonging to the future sovereign. Camilla pushed her chair backward. She told him that not everything belonged automatically to the next reign and refused to apologize for attempting to protect herself after enduring years of public hostility. The Queen Consort insisted that she had earned security, not merely comfort, and she would not allow her position to disappear the moment her husband was no longer able to defend it. Charles felt the emotional impact before either of them had even raised their voice. The king watched his wife and his son speak as though they were already establishing opposing sides around a future in which he was no longer present. He had spent years attempting to hold them together as one family. But the document suggested that both sides were preparing themselves for a future in which trust had completely disappeared. William responded with equal determination. He explained that Camilla's security could be guaranteed without restricting the authority connected to the next reign. The future king then asked who else had already seen the draft. Camilla hesitated. That brief silence changed the entire atmosphere. Later, a documented account prepared for Charles revealed that copies of the draft had already been shared with selected household figures in an attempt to gather support before William had even been informed. The monarch immediately ordered a confidential review of every agreement connected to Clarence House. What emerged from that review made one reality impossible to dismiss. This was no longer simply a disagreement between family members. It had become a struggle over control. Once Charles discovered that plans concerning the residence had progressed without his son's knowledge, he summoned Camilla to the room where their marriage and the monarchy would finally collide. There were no aides present when Charles confronted her. The sealed review rested on the table between them, its pages containing decisions and details he believed had crossed an unacceptable boundary. Camilla entered expecting a difficult discussion, but she did not expect the destruction of her position at Clarence House. Within minutes, restraint turned into accusation. The couple who had survived decades of controversy now found themselves divided by the one institution neither of them could escape. Charles had called her in before the transfer became public, giving her one final opportunity to explain the draft arrangement and the individuals who had been contacted on its behalf. He confronted her both as a husband and as sovereign, the man who loved her and the monarch responsible for protecting the crown. That difference mattered. A sovereign carried the highest authority within the monarchy, while a husband could still be influenced by guilt, loyalty, affection, and fear. The king pushed the reviewed documents across the table. "You had no right to decide what happened after me without speaking to William." His voice remained controlled, but the anger beneath those words was impossible to miss. Camilla did not reach for the documents. Instead, she stared directly at Charles as though his accusation had confirmed every private fear she had brought into the room. Her response carried years of buried resentment. The Queen Consort said she had spent far too long being treated as temporary, accepted only while Charles remained powerful enough to defend her position. Her voice grew stronger as she accused him of choosing his son over his wife. She declared that she would not simply allow herself to be pushed aside when the succession eventually moved forward. Charles listened to her words before responding with painful calm. He admitted that he understood her fear, but he told her she had turned personal insecurity into a battle for authority. Clarence House could never be transformed into a fortress against the next monarch. The residence contained official records and working areas connected to the future reign, which meant control of the property was no longer simply a matter of comfort or personal security. It had become a question of royal authority. Camilla demanded a direct answer. She asked whether the transfer was truly about governance, or whether William had finally convinced his father to eliminate her influence. Charles immediately rejected the accusation. Through a documented private conversation preserved as part of the review, he revealed that William had actually asked him not to punish her. The prince had even questioned whether accepting Clarence House would make the family conflict worse. That revelation unsettled Camilla. But the most serious discovery was still ahead. Charles opened the review to a marked clause showing that household officers chosen by Camilla could have controlled access to royal records stored inside Clarence House. Household officers were senior members of staff responsible for overseeing royal duties, documents, and access. Placed in the wrong hands, that authority could influence what information the next reign received, and what information it might never receive at all. Camilla finally understood that the conflict had moved beyond the limits of their marriage. Senior constitutional figures had already examined the proposed response. These were advisors responsible for protecting the lawful structure and continuity of the monarchy, and their involvement meant the order was being secured beyond the reach of a simple personal appeal. When Charles ended the meeting and the door closed behind Camilla, the central question was no longer whether the king would take action. The real question was who had helped him make that action impossible to reverse. Charles may have signed the order, but the decision had not been reached entirely on his own. Behind the transfer stood a small circle of people responsible for protecting the crown from private arrangements that might interfere with the succession. Their influence was neither dramatic nor public. Instead, it appeared through carefully written language, revised clauses, and one serious warning delivered directly to the king. Unless Charles acted immediately, Clarence House could eventually become the center of a constitutional conflict. Before making the transfer final, Charles consulted constitutional advisors, senior household officials, and Princess Anne. Constitutional advisors were experts responsible for helping protect the lawful structure of the monarchy and ensuring its future continuity. Their concern was not personal comfort, royal status, or deciding who deserved the more prestigious residence. Their fear was that a private arrangement could weaken William's future authority and divide royal staff between two competing households. And met privately with her brother after reviewing the sealed documents. The princess watched Charles pace silently across the room, carrying the burden of a decision that seemed painful regardless of how carefully it might be justified. Her reputation for loyalty and straightforward honesty gave her a unique position during moments of family crisis. She was not someone who would soften an uncomfortable truth simply to protect her brother from emotional pain. Eventually, Charles asked whether forcing Camilla out of Clarence House would amount to cruelty. The king had spent decades defending her. He had endured public criticism, challenged hostility toward their relationship, and repeatedly insisted that their marriage deserved recognition and respect. Now, protecting the succession appeared to require him to publicly diminish the very woman he had fought so hard to place beside him. Choosing duty felt dangerously close to betrayal. And turned the review toward Charles and pointed directly to the clause concerning access to royal records. She told him that the crown could never depend entirely upon private goodwill. Those records contained briefings, decisions, and sensitive information connected to the next reign. Allowing selected household officers to control access to them could leave William dependent on individuals whose loyalties might lie somewhere else. Charles remained silent for several moments. The monarch understood Camilla's fear of losing her security, and admitted that she understood that fear as well. But in Anne's view, the Queen Consort had crossed a serious boundary by attempting to preserve authority that could continue after Charles was no longer capable of controlling events himself. The pressure increased when advisers delivered their recommendation through a formal constitutional briefing. Clarence House should be transferred immediately rather than simply promised to William at some point in the future. Waiting would allow competing claims to strengthen. It would give staff time to choose sides. And it would allow private agreements to become increasingly difficult to reverse. And watched as Charles reached the final page of the recommendation. She did not celebrate when he finally accepted it. She understood exactly what the decision would cost her brother. The order might protect the future king, but it would also strike directly at the heart of a marriage built through decades of resistance and controversy. The final decree went much further than Camilla had expected. It altered staffing authority, limited access to official documents, and redirected household command toward William's office. Losing Clarence House itself was only the beginning. By the time the king's signature was dry, the residence had not merely changed hands. The staff, privileges, and private channels of influence surrounding Camilla had already started disappearing. The consequences arrived much faster than she had anticipated. Within hours of the order being signed, members of staff received new instructions. Private offices were secured for review, and household schedules began moving under the direction of William's team. Camilla had expected negotiations. She had expected delays. Perhaps she had even expected one final opportunity to appeal. Instead, she watched the machinery of the monarchy move forward with relentless precision, transforming the home she knew into a place where she no longer possessed authority. Camilla soon discovered that the decree contained a fixed timetable for her departure and transferred administrative control before William formally took possession of Clarence House. Administrative control meant authority over staff, official rooms, records, and the residence's everyday operations. That detail was important because it meant the transfer was already functioning in practice. William did not need to physically move into Clarence House before Camilla's authority disappeared. Every new instruction now carried the power of his office rather than hers. The Queen Consort entered her private study and suddenly stopped. Two officials were examining locked cabinets, cataloguing their contents, separating her personal possessions from Crown property, and securing documents connected to official royal responsibilities. Camilla gripped the back of a chair and ordered them to leave. Neither official challenged her. One simply presented written authorization carrying Charles's approval. At that moment, she understood that even her anger no longer had the power to stop what was happening. Camilla waited until the officials had left before shutting the door behind them. She sat alone and opened one of the drawers. Inside, she found a handwritten note from Charles dating back to their earliest years at Clarence House. For the first time since learning about the decree, her anger gave way to grief. The residence had once represented survival after years of public hostility. Now every cabinet being labelled and every possession being catalogued reminded her that loyalty had not protected her from being removed. The speed of the transition only deepened the wound. Camilla became convinced that Charles had prepared everything long before their confrontation. In her mind, he had allowed her to defend herself only after the final outcome had already been secured. She felt she had lost much more than rooms, staff, and control of a royal residence. She believed the influence she had earned through years at Charles's side had been reduced to a privilege that could disappear with a single signature. Charles called her. She refused to answer. He called again. When she still did not respond, the king sent a private message asking her to meet him without advisers. Camilla returned the message unopened. Her silence forced Charles to confront the personal consequences of the royal command he continued to defend as necessary. William found little satisfaction in the authority now moving toward him. As the future king examined Clarence House, he discovered briefing files in several rooms concerning his eventual reign. Among them were documents intended to guide important decisions during a future transition of power. Their presence helped explain why Charles had become convinced that Clarence House could not remain outside William's control. William now understood the constitutional reasoning behind his father's decision. But understanding the reasoning did nothing to erase the damage it had caused. He could see Camilla's isolation. He could see Charles's regret. And he could see the growing possibility that formal procedure might turn personal pain into permanent resentment. So William made a decision neither Charles nor Camilla had expected. With his father unable to reach his wife and Camilla rejecting every formal attempt at communication, William stepped outside the protection of palace procedure. He requested a private meeting with Camilla.
No ads.
No documents. And no witnesses. William could have simply allowed the transfer to continue without ever confronting Camilla directly, but doing so would have left the deepest part of the conflict unresolved. He entered their private meeting not as the future king who had just received a royal residence, but as a son facing the woman who believed he had taken her home away from her. With no aides in the room and no official documents between them, neither could hide behind formal palace language. They were forced to confront the fear and resentment beneath their anger. Camilla remained standing when William entered. The Queen Consort looked briefly at the hand he offered, then refused to take it without saying a word. William remained standing as well until Camilla finally lowered herself into the chair opposite him. Those few seconds of silence carried enormous weight because the transfer of Clarence House was close to becoming public. Once the announcement was released, every expression and every gesture would be interpreted as either victory, defeat, or humiliation. William had deliberately arranged the conversation before Clarence House was officially presented as part of his expanding royal responsibilities. He understood that accepting the residence without speaking directly to Camilla could make him appear triumphant, even though he had never asked for her removal. He did not want Clarence House to become a permanent symbol of conflict between the current royal household and the household of the future king. Camilla was the first to speak. She told William that every box being packed inside Clarence House felt like another reminder that she had never truly belonged there. As she continued, some of the anger disappeared from her voice. The Queen admitted that she was terrified of becoming powerless once Charles was no longer able to protect her. That fear, she explained, had followed her through every room that was now being removed from her authority. William listened carefully, but he did not change his position. The future king explained that Camilla's proposed arrangement had created a different fear for him. It made him believe that his father's household was being prepared to resist the authority of the next reign. A royal household represented the staff and officers responsible for supporting a senior royal's public duties and private authority. For that reason, control of Clarence House involved much more than simply deciding who lived inside the building. It could determine access to records, information, staff, and influence during a future succession. William told Camilla that the dispute had never been about denying her marriage to Charles or attempting to erase her position beside him. The issue was preventing personal fear from controlling authority that belonged to the future of the crown. He assured her that she would continue to have a protected residence, appropriate security, staff, and personal dignity. But he also made one thing absolutely clear. He would not give up Clarence House, and he would not weaken the order his father had already signed. Camilla finally revealed the truth behind her actions. In a private account prepared after the meeting, she acknowledged that she had circulated the draft arrangement because she did not trust William's future household to protect her position. She admitted that fear had pushed her beyond a boundary she could no longer reasonably defend. William showed no satisfaction at hearing the admission. Instead, he made a simple request. He asked Camilla to leave Clarence House without beginning an internal challenge against the transfer. Camilla agreed, but only under one condition. No official palace statement would present the transfer as William's victory over her. William accepted immediately. Their agreement did not remove the emotional damage between them, but it changed what could have become a bitter royal expulsion into a controlled and orderly surrender. And just as that private agreement was reached, the decision was about to explode across Britain's front pages. When the announcement became public, the transfer of Clarence House stopped being a private family dispute. It became a national drama involving marriage, succession, loyalty, and the future direction of the crown. Commentators examined every sentence of the palace announcement, searching for signs that Camilla was being punished. Crowds began gathering near royal gates. But one newspaper photograph eventually captured the situation more powerfully than any television debate or palace statement. It showed Camilla leaving Clarence House while William entered through another entrance. The palace officially confirmed that Clarence House had been reassigned to Prince William by direct order of King Charles. Camilla, meanwhile, would move to another protected royal residence. The official announcement referred only to continuity and succession. Succession described the legal and royal process through which authority eventually passed from one monarch to the next. That carefully chosen wording made the transfer appear controlled and institutional, even while the public sensed the emotional conflict beneath it. Shock spread rapidly. By the following morning, a national newspaper published a full-page photograph showing Camilla's car leaving the residence. The headline declared, "The house passes to William." That single image transformed a private transfer into a public symbol. Camilla appeared to be leaving at precisely the moment William was arriving. Millions of people interpreted the photograph as evidence of her defeat, whether or not they understood what had actually happened behind palace doors. Crowds gathered near the mall and outside Clarence House. Some expressed sympathy for the Queen Consort. They argued that no wife should be forced from the home she had shared with her husband. Others supported the decision, viewing it as a necessary and decisive transfer of responsibility toward the future king. The same royal decision had now become two completely different stories. To one side, it represented cruelty. To the other, it represented necessary order. William watched as one broadcaster describe him as the winner of a royal power struggle. The prince's expression immediately tightened. He instructed his office to prepare language acknowledging Camilla's years of royal service and rejecting any suggestion that her departure should be treated as something to celebrate. William believed he had accepted a responsibility, not won a victory, and he refused to allow Camilla's public humiliation to become part of his own rise. Camilla saw the newspaper front page while surrounded by packed belongings. She looked at the photograph for several moments before turning the paper face down. She said nothing. Camilla understood that the public might remember that image long after the private fears behind her decisions had been forgotten. That realization hurt more deeply than the headline itself. Charles acted before the public narrative could become permanent. Through a second documented palace statement, the king declared that the decision to transfer Clarence House had been his alone. He accepted complete responsibility. By doing so, Charles protected William from accusations that he had secretly engineered his stepmother's removal. He also made clear that no hidden campaign by the future king had forced the transfer. But words alone could not fully settle the controversy. One final public appearance would determine how the family presented itself after the crisis. The monarch stood at the center. William stood beside him. And Camilla appeared with them by her own choice. None of them looked victorious. Yet their positions communicated one unmistakable message. Whatever had happened behind closed doors, the dispute was over. And the crown would not allow itself to appear divided in public. Once the cameras captured Charles, Camilla, and William standing together, the deeper meaning of the Clarence House transfer became impossible to ignore. One person had lost a home. Another had accepted a new responsibility. And the king had chosen the future stability of the crown over his own personal comfort. Clarence House ultimately passed into William's control, but the true consequences of the decision could never be measured simply through keys, rooms, property, or royal titles. Charles had protected the succession by making one of the most emotionally difficult decisions of his reign. Camilla had lost the residence she had viewed for years as proof that she truly belonged within the royal family. But at the same time, she had finally been forced to confront the fear that had pushed her actions too far. William, meanwhile, had inherited something very different from a prize. He had inherited the responsibility of exercising authority without humiliating the person displaced by that change. Camilla left Clarence House according to the departure schedule agreed during her private conversation with William. The Queen Consort relocated to another protected royal residence where her security, personal staff, and independence remained preserved. That protection carried considerable importance. Leaving Clarence House did not mean Camilla was being removed from royal life altogether. She would continue performing her public responsibilities, but the authority associated with Clarence House had permanently passed beyond her control. William accepted the residence without celebration, ceremony, or any visible sense of triumph. The prince ordered that Clarence House should become a working center for his growing royal responsibilities, rather than a monument representing Camilla's defeat. Those responsibilities carried constitutional significance, meaning the formal obligations connected to preparing for the next reign. William understood that authority received through another person's pain had to be exercised carefully and with restraint. Camilla approached her final morning at Clarence House quietly. Before leaving, she placed the house key on a polished table instead of personally handing it to a royal official. The gesture made her departure feel personal rather than procedural. Charles arrived only moments later. He noticed the key, picked it up, and stood beside his wife without speaking. For several seconds, the king held the small object that represented everything he had taken from Camilla and transferred to his son. Eventually, she broke the silence. Camilla told Charles that she understood why he had made the decision, even though she might never forgive the way he had carried it out. She admitted that fear had caused her to protect more than simply her personal security. She had attempted to preserve influence beyond the period of Charles's active reign, and that decision had ultimately forced the crown to respond. Charles answered her with painful honesty. The king explained that he had never wanted Camilla to believe she was being erased from royal life, but he could not allow personal fear to determine the future direction of the monarchy. His decision had protected institutional continuity, the orderly transfer of royal authority from one reign to another, yet protecting that continuity had left a wound inside their marriage that no royal order could completely repair. William emerged from the crisis with greater authority but also a deeper understanding of the responsibility attached to it. The future king had defended the powers connected to Clarence House while still attempting to preserve Camilla's dignity. His response demonstrated that succession required firmness without unnecessary cruelty. It also showed that leadership was measured not only by the authority someone received, but by how that authority was exercised toward those required to surrender it. The transfer established one final principle. Royal residences, privileges, official records, and channels of influence could never be privately controlled in a way that threatened the future direction of the crown. Charles chose duty. Camilla accepted responsibility for the decisions she had made. William accepted the burden that now waited ahead of him. The family remained wounded, but it remained together. The dispute had reached its conclusion, and the monarchy moved forward beneath one clear line of authority. The doors of Clarence House closed on Camilla's chapter and eventually opened for William. But the moment was not presented as a celebration of her downfall. Instead, it became the final confirmation that the crown had chosen its future, and that everyone involved had paid an emotional price for that choice. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.